Welcome to our staff webinar on the Simplified Review Framework. We're going to be focusing today on the funding opportunity development and reissue process as we've been moving through our implementation. My name is Megan Columbus. I'll be your moderator for the day, but I am joined by a host of characters who have been deeply involved in implementation of Simplified Review Framework. So today we're going to be hearing a little bit from Brian Hoshaw, who's co-chair of the implementation committee. He's also the chief of the scientific review branch at the National Eye Institute. We'll be following his presentation. He'll be giving an overview. I'll be following his presentation by Lori Roman, who's the acting director of the NIH Guide in the Office of Extramural Research, as well as she has many duties in electronic research administration. And then we're going to have Tracy Waldeck come on screen to help answer questions. She's director of the Division of Extramural Activities at NIMH, and Paula Goodwin, who's a program administrator officer within the Office of Extramural Research. We have lots of other people here who are going to be answering questions in the background, and so thank you to all of you for your help. And let's move on to the agenda.
Megan, I'm sorry.
Megan,
there's no attendees. We haven't opened this.
Hold on a second. Something happened. Hold on.
All right, let me go back.
Great practice, Megan.
Great
practice.
That
was really good.
Really good job. All right, hold on. That's so weird. All right, you ready, Megan? 3,
yep, I am.
2, 1, go.
All right, I'm just going to wait for a moment while our participants funnel into our virtual room today. The numbers are still climbing. We have about 300 here so far, so give me just another moment. I want to be respectful of your time. Okay, we're still at 500. Numbers are climbing. All right, let me go ahead and get started with some logistics before we begin the webinar. Today, for our staff webinar on Simplified Review, we are going to be trying to answer as many questions as we can. I'm sure people have lots of questions. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen rather than the chat to ask your questions. That's what we'll be using to collect and sort them and answer them. The participants are going to be muted, and we are recording, and so we'll be making this session available by, we hope, by the end of next week. All right, so let's begin. Welcome to our staff webinar on the Simplified Review Framework. We're focused on funding opportunity development and reissue, and we'll be going over and reminding people about the Simplified Framework. My name is Megan Columbus, and I'll be your moderator for today, but I am joined by a whole cast of characters who have been deeply involved in this whole process. Brian Hoshaw is going to be one of our first presenters, and he is co-chair of the implementation team, and he is chief of the scientific review branch at the National Eye Institute. Also welcoming today as presenter Lori Roman, who's acting director of the NIH Guide in the Office of Extramural Research, in addition to her many duties within ERA. And we'll be having both Tracy Waldeck, who's the director of the Division of Extramural Activities at NIMH, and Paula Goodwin, who's a program administration officer within the Office of Extramural Research, joining us on screen to help answer questions. We do have a number of other people who are here who have been deeply involved in this process, who will be answering questions in the chat and be helping on the back end. So thank you to everyone. And this is just a very small representation of the number of people who have been involved in this effort. Today, we're going to be giving you an overview of the Simplified Review Framework. We're going to be doing some myth busting, those questions that we keep getting over and over. Be talking about resources and communications plans, talking about funding opportunity development and reissuing, and providing you key context. Before we get to this agenda today, we're going to be starting with a video from the director of NIH's Office of Extramural Research, who is also the Deputy Director for Extramural Research at NIH, Dr. Mike Lauer.
Hello, I'm Mike Lauer. I'm the NIH Deputy Director for Extramural Research. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're talking about Simplified Review Framework. Let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing up until this point to make the transition to Simplified Review Framework a success. This is one of the top priorities of the National Institutes of Health, and we cannot thank you enough for all the work that you've done up until now. Now, as a reminder, there were two main purposes for the Simplified Review Framework. One is to refocus the efforts of peer reviewers on the scientific and technical merit of the tens of thousands of proposals that we receive every year. The second is to mitigate the effects of bias, implicit bias related to the reputation of investigators or the reputations of institutions. Now we're moving on to the next phase of the Simplified Review Framework. And so there are a couple of points that I would like to make. One is that we have something that we call boilerplate language. I might want to call it standard language. This is language that has been constructed after a great deal of thought on the parts of many people and after extensive vetting. We ask you, and please do everything you can to avoid the temptation to modify that standardized language or that boilerplate language. Things are much, much easier if the boilerplate language is left alone. And please keep in mind and remember that we're very grateful to many of you and many of our colleagues for the extremely hard and thoughtful work that went into crafting that language. The second is to keep in mind that the purpose of this is to simplify the peer review framework. And that means we want to keep peer review criteria to an absolute minimum, those minimum that are necessary in order to properly assess the scientific and technical merit of proposals. Now, there may be times when adding extra peer review criteria may be perfectly legitimate, and we certainly understand that. But we would ask you at this point, as we're moving towards reissuing a whole number of notices of funding opportunities or NOFOs, think hard about whether or not those extra review criteria are really absolutely essential in order to get a high quality peer review. Now, another point that we'd like to make has to do with online critique template, the use of the online critique template, otherwise known as OCT. We've been quite pleased with how this has gone so far. We want to take this to a higher level. We're going to be implementing OCT for the parent announcements, which of course account for a very large proportion of the applications that we receive. So as you are working on developing your reissued NOFOs, think about the online critique template, OCT. We would very much encourage you to take advantage of that. So let me close by again thanking you for all the work that you've done to date and all the work that you will be doing as we move on to this next phase of the implementation of Simplified Review Framework, including the reissuance of many NOFOs. It is because of your hard work that this project will ultimately be a success.
All right, thank you so much to Mike Lauer for that introduction. Now we have Brian Hoshaw, who's coming on to give us an overview and remind us about the Simplified Review Framework. Brian?
Hi, thanks, Megan. Yes, I'm Brian Hoshaw. I'm the Review Chief at the National Eye Institute. I'm also one of the 3 co-chairs for the SRF Implementation Committee. My other 2 co-chairs are Lisa Steele and Mark Caprera, who are both Review Chief at CSR. So we'll start with an overview of SRF and focus on what's changing. So this will take place for applications submitted with due dates on or after January 25th, 2025. So about 10 months from now. And those will be in the summer of 2025, be reviewed summer of 2025, and then go to October 2025 council. So what's affected by this? So Most RPG activity codes will be affected by this. I'm going to, in the chat now, we're going to put a link to the SRF intramural site. I'm sorry, intranet site. And I recommend everyone click on this. We've sent it out a number of times, bookmark this. The SRF committee, the training committee, communications committees put a lot of information in here, a lot of resources. Any questions you might have about SRF, when it happens, how it's affected, FAQs, you're probably going to find on this website. So SRF affects most RPGs. We have the activity codes listed here. So it's very important to look at this list. It's on the intranet site as you start your reissuing process. We want to note that the DP activity codes have recently been removed, and that decision was made because these activity codes are more focused on investigator than just the research project. So there's sort of the text in section 5 is much different than the other ones. So those would be excluded for now. So here's a snapshot showing what is changing in the peer review as part of SRF. So on the left, we have the way reviewers currently review these applications. We have the 5 review criteria. Each one received an individual score, and then all 5 will be incorporated to affect the overall impact score. And then on the right, we're showing what's going to happen under the Simplified Review Framework. The same 5 criteria will be there. They will still be assessed, and they will all affect the overall impact score. But now they're being grouped into factors. Factor 1 includes significance innovation. Factor 2 includes approach. And then factor 3 addresses expertise and resources with investigators' environment. The way we like to think about this is factor 1 is, should it be done? Factor 2 is, can it be done? And then factor 3 looks at whether or not they have the resources or not. So factors 1 and 2 will receive individual criteria scores, 1 to 9. Factor 3 will be assessed as either it's appropriate resources or there are gaps identified by the reviewers. And if they do identify gaps, then they're going to note on the summary statement what those gaps are. So another change has to do with the additional review considerations. These are just, currently discussed after final score. They don't affect the score, but still assigned to reviewers. So some of these are being shifted from the first level of peer review to the awarding IC. And they will look at those for applications that fall in their funding range. So on the left are the 5 ones that reviewers consider. And then after SRF is implemented, reviewers for these for RPGs will only look at authentication and budget and period support. So since we've started this implementation, we've done given a lot of presentations, done a lot of outreach. The ICO coordinators for each IC have brought back a lot of questions, and we've been hearing the same questions over and over. So we'd like to address those now and give a definitive answer. We're calling this part myth busting. So one of the first ones we received is inclusion plans are being moved from additional review criteria to factor 2. So the drop-down boxes for inclusion are going away. So even though inclusion plans and study timeline are being moved to factor 2, you'll still see the drop-down for inclusions. And then the reviewers will still have to address in factor 2 study timeline for clinical trials. And the reason these two factors are being these two aspects are being moved is because they both have to do with the approach of the application. So they wanted to put it in factor 2, so there's more emphasis on those. So another myth is that all RPG NOFOs have to be reissued. As I said before, only the ones on the activity code list will have to be reissued. So it's very important to look at those lists when you start doing your reissue. Okay, so another question we've been receiving lately is, if we have a NOFO and we have an application date that goes past 2025, can we keep it with the old framework or extend it with the new framework? And a decision was made that there will not be any exceptions to any of the NOFOs that fall under SRF. So any of them that have activity codes that are affected, that have receipt dates that are on or after January 2025 will have to be reissued. And this is something Mike addressed, but we want to really bring it up again so everyone is clear on this. There were some people were asking, well, it sounds like ICs can't have any specialized language if they have an RFA or another NOFO. They can't add anything under Section 5 under the criteria. So ICs will still have the opportunity to add some text that is under specific to this NOFO in Section 5. However, we really are encouraging ICs to look at the new text in Section 5 and really reevaluate how much those additional lines add to the review, add to Section 5. The text is much more expansive. It covers a lot more the default text. And we want to keep in mind that we're trying to make this simpler for reviewers. So keeping the standard text is easier as we're reviewing, multiple NOFOs in one study section. Another misconception we're hearing is that it will change the way the requirements for applications. PIs will be asked to format or write the application differently as part of SRF. So there's an important distinction here. There are no required changes to the application part of Simplified Review Framework. SRF focuses on how the applications are evaluated by the reviewer, how they are able to focus on scientific and technical merit of the application. As always, we should encourage applicants to look at Section 5, for any NOFO that they are writing, because this is what the reviewers look at as they're reviewing it. So you want to see that when you're, writing your application. And of course, Section 5 will be different, so that you keep that in mind. Regardless of the fact that there aren't any required changes, we're still going to be developing a lot of training materials, doing outreach to the community to talk about the changes, how it affects their application, and how it affects how to be reviewed. Okay, now I'd like to turn it back over to Megan.
All right. There we go. Okay, so Brian, just before you leave, I think it's important. We got a lot of questions about why this activity code and not that one. And I just want to be very clear that this only applies to the activity codes that are listed. And there aren't plans at this time, at least, to include others. And so as we go in and we get through my part and we talk to Lori's part about what actually needs to happen, keep that in mind, because I think that's an important point.
Yes, absolutely. And some of the ones that were excluded, they have very different text under Section 5. And that's one of the reasons the decision was made to not include the DP ones, because we have one set of approved language for Section 5. And the ones that were very different from sort of the standard RPG were excluded from that.
Right, great. Thanks so much for your presentation. All right, let's talk a little bit about resources and communication plans before we get into some nitty-gritty about reissuing. Okay, so we have some guide notices that are upcoming. We just want you to know when the community is going to be alerted to what information. There's going to be a notice on the Simplified Review Framework, and that's detailing the approach to updating the funding opportunity review language, right? And the timing of the forms availability. We think that's going to be really important. It's going to be accompanied by an overview notice that puts Simplified Review in context with other changes that are happening for 2025. And we'll be getting information out to the community about those changes as well to you guys before that announcement goes out. Along with announcement that provides the details of Forms I, because Forms I will be really important to the implementation of all of this. Even though there's no changes in Forms I for implementing simplified peer review, which I think is also an important note. But in order for the application forms to be available at the right times for people, it's important that you understand that we're in the middle of a forms transition. Okay, so we'll be publishing these guide notices late in the week of April 1st, likely around the 4th. Okay, we'll also be announcing that there's going to be a public webinar to walk through these changes And that's going to be on April 17th from 1 to 2. And I think that guide notice actually just got published yesterday. We put in a whole lot of resources for you all on that extramural staff intranet, and you can see the link to that in the actual chat. You're going to see, the key messages are in the general information part. You have links to the public Simplifying Review webpage so you can see what's available for the public. You have both access to staff-facing and public FAQs from there, guidance for SROs to share with the reviewers, one-page fact sheets for SROs and program officials. We have mock-ups of critique template and the summary statements. We have reissue guidance, and we even have a high-level communication plan so that you know what's coming and know when to expect things like SRO training and that kind of thing. All right, with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Lori Roman to talk about the actual development and reissue process and how we make sure that we get the right information in section 5 of those funding opportunity announcements. Lori?
Thanks so much, Megan. What I'm going to start off with is basically the take-home messages that I want to leave you with. So first, and I think most important, is do your homework. The first thing that you really want to do is make a game plan. Take a look at your portfolio of RPGs that are on the list of activity codes to be participating in the SRF. Figure out which ones need to be extended. We'll talk about that in a few more minutes. Which ones do need to be reissued, and similarly, which ones, because they have deadlines that are open, beyond 2025, will need to be expired early and reissued with the new criteria. Make a timeline, make a plan. Keep it simple. The more NOFO-specific requests, the longer it's going to take. Try new things, as Mike indicated. This is an opportunity to convert your NOFO to using OCT templates and the neat tools that are associated, like the OCT dashboard. Some great opportunities there. Fourth is be kind. We are all in this together. We realize that this is going to be a very frenzied time with lots of things changing at the same time. We are in this all together, and we really are relying on you for support. And similarly, we're here for you as resources and as conduits. And then I think lastly, and most importantly, is if you don't know, don't get frustrated, ask. Ask early. And we do ask, again, because people are going to be very stressed, and a lot of the folks that are going to be interacted with are not the people like other panelists, but folks that are really in the offices doing the real work. And so please ask early and ask nicely. All right, so let's proceed. So we really want to make this whole process as painless as possible. And so the next few slides are going to follow the schematic below and effectively walk through the workflow of reissuing a NOFO. And what I'm going to be sort of covering was basically came from or was informed by the 8 ICs who participated in the soft launch project, which occurred earlier this year. And again, what we're covering today only applies to RPG NOFOs that need to be reissued for SRF. So first, during the planning phase, as I've mentioned, you want to identify the NOFOs with applicable activity codes that will have due dates on or after January 25, 2025. And again, that is the October 2025 cancel. We have provided and will provide an updated list of the NOFOs that we have found that we think that are going to be impacted. But again, it is the IC's responsibility to look at their portfolio and establish in their list and on their to-do list the NOFOs that will need to be reissued. You can always confirm your list using the NIH guide to grants and contracts. For each NOFO, determine a plan for the transition. So first, things that are expiring prior to September 25th, which is the beginning of the last council round before this goes into effect. Anything that is expiring prior to that you can extend. And Opera has provided guidance that you can extend up to 2 council rounds to avoid having to reissue NOFOs twice. A guide notice must be issued using a special template, and the name is provided here, and available in phone. And we're asking you to use this guide notice for a template in particular, because we've worked very carefully with the NIH web team, part of Megan's shop, so that we can most effectively insert the new data onto the existing NOFOs. If you have several NOFOs that all expire on the same date and are being reissued on the same date, you can include multiple NOFOs on that notice to extend. So anything then that will be expiring between September 25th and January 24th, 25, prepare to reissue that with SRF NOFO. Anything that has due dates that go beyond January 25, 2025, January 25th, 2025, will need to be, basically you'll need to issue informing the extramural community of an early expiration and plans to reissue so that you can incorporate the SRF templates in that reissue. Again, there's no sort of leeway or exceptions. All of the RPG participating NOFOs will need to have SRF language in Section 5. So continuing on with the planning phase, what are things to consider when prioritizing which your NOFOs for reissuance? First, consider the expiration date, right? The things that have that need to be, figure out who needs to be extended. I'll take a look at your task models, because again, all of the ICs have different pathways for NOFOs to be developed and reviewed prior to entering into the guide. Look at shared interests, take into consider any exclusions in terms of page length and things of that nature that are anticipated. Things that may need OGC review, that always adds onto the time in the guide. Whether you will be also publishing companion NOFOs, and whether, again, something is going to be a cooperative agreement. The goal here is to identify steps where you can gain efficiencies. And I think we'll probably talk about companion NOFOs in a little bit. And then we have some sort of additional guidance to take those into consideration. So this is coming from something that Stephanie and I presented yesterday at EPMC. And so this is still draft guidance, because what was presented was really with the goal of soliciting input from EPMC members. But again, following up on what Mike mentioned, our high-level objective is to encourage the use of the simple review criteria. And these were written to be more broadly applied to focus in on the scientific and technical merit of the applications. And we want those language to be used across NOFOs, first to promote fair and consistent review, not just within a NOFO, but across NOFOs at the level of an IC for funding decision. We also think that this will also help to reduce some confusion that can be created when you have reviewers and applicants dealing with multiple sorts of different presentations of criteria. And again, the goal here is to also balance programmatic goals with a burden of burden basically created when we're customizing review criteria. So what we're going to ask you for is, certainly NOFO specific criteria, though discouraged for the reasons I just meant, is certainly allowed. If your program does need to have some changes, what we are asking for is to notify the guide ahead of time. We will have an approval process in place. We are strongly discouraging any changes in things like heading and arrangements of sections within Section 5 or areas within Section 5. And so if your program does need some of those changes and you can justify those, please let us know. And the purpose there is, again, not to create a filter or a barrier, but allow us to work with you ahead of time so that we can get things, if we're going to make those changes, we can make them up early so you can review them. And so there's no slowing down the review process. So we really want to work with you early as opposed to, doing something that needs to be changed at the end, which is going to cause things to need to go back further in the process. So again, please work with us, and we want to work with you if your program does have special needs. So during the writing phase, again, continuing on, we have created 2 new templates, non-OCT version 26 and SRF OCT compatible. And so those will be made available. One thing that we have done with those, and why they are not yet currently active, is, let me just jumping down to the last bullet. As you probably all have heard, we have been in a bit of a flux with PEDP language. We are on the edge of having an interim solution. And what we have done is to basically allow you to check a box and cassette in the approved language into the various sections of the NOFO. This is completely up to the ICs whether they want to include PEDP or not. It's, again, totally up to you. I will tell you that the parent announcements will contain PEDP language. Okay, so jumping back up to the second bullet, when you're looking at the NOFOs that you're going to be reissuing, take a look to see if you made any kind of corrective notices or post-production changes that need to be incorporated into the current version. Because again, foam is not the system of record currently. And so you will need to go in and make those changes or updates to the version that you will be reissuing. I'm sorry, not to the reissue itself, not the, obviously you don't need to change the old one. So you're going to put those changes into the new version. Any template or policy specific changes that you requested previously will need to be requested again because they don't copy over. And that, again, the important message is don't assume everything will copy because of changes in the template. Review from start to finish. If you are adding NOFO specific criteria, do not cut and paste them from a previous version because the format of the questions or the format of the criteria has changed. So they will need to be presented as evaluative statement. For example, evaluate the rationale for undertaking the study, ... And then also evaluate if you are making any changes to section 5, reflect on section 1 and section 4 to make sure that you've described the information that you're being asked in your NOFO specific criteria or other changes to the criteria, and that you've asked for it in section 4. So again, those 3 need to agree. And I've already talked about PEDP. The important thing, just to again remind you for PEDP, is PEDP will only be reviewed in the overall section, in the overall criteria. Okay, so no longer in all 5, only in the overall. Okay, so what we're asking for, I talked about sort of asking for permission to make some changes. We also are going to have a checklist. And on that checklist, the important part of the information is telling us what you changed, if anything. If the only thing that you've done is, you have SRF criteria, tell us. We are then not going to assign the myriad of SMEs that could be assigned to an application, because we're going to say, and the DEA or equivalent's going to sign off on that. We're going to take that on faith and not ask SMEs to review it. If you tell us that you have made changes, then we will be assigning some SMEs. We're going to try to, basically streamline this as tightly as we can. So similarly here too, if you are asking for changes, we ask that you provide those to us. and that they are very detailed and provide a justification. And we will get back to you, and that is the guide. And this is, following either the guide or IMOD, immediate office of the director review. And we ask that in the case of making changes that you use a specific title as a subject matter if you are making changes, and if not, use the title that's indicated up here. Again, these are going to go to the guide mailbox. The link is provided, and that's going to allow our staff to easily and efficiently sort these so that we can get information back to you as soon as possible. We already know that you do this, but we're reminding you again, is you need to review these things from start to finish. And it's really critical because, again, anything that needs to be changed within the guide in terms of filling things out that got missed is going to add time to the process. So, all channel your Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. Okay, so shared interest, consider any opportunities you have to streamline. The standard shared interest period is 2 weeks. So if if you're doing something that is longer than that, maybe consider reaching out to your partners that you've had in the past so that they can sign on early. We have no problem. If everybody's on the train of moving things out of shared interest earlier, if we really do need to expedite something. So again, we'll work with us. In terms of the review, the guide is going to basically make sure that everything under key attributes, the guide section, request related notices have been completed properly. You've done the review, so that that's going to be an easy lift. It will be the review policy shop that will basically look at the entire NOFO, checking for consistencies between sections 1, the description, section 4, what's being asked of the applicant, and 5, the review criteria. And again, we will be assigning SMEs based on the answers to the checklist and, of course, DRR to confirm dates if they are not standard. And I didn't touch anything. Sorry about that. Okay. I've already mentioned several times that creating, asking for any kind of deviation may add additional time. This is going to follow the standard iterative process until we have all the comments that are addressed. You should view the HTML after all of the track changes have been removed. This will give you an opportunity to identify any formatting issues. We're going to be presenting to the guide liaisons next week, a couple of, and providing, in terms of just information that they can take back to the IC, some tips and tricks to help prevent those formatting issues to occur at the beginning. So again, we're providing those additional resources. At the point where we are in quality control, you really should not be asking for additional changes to the NOFO because it will delay publication. And we also are asking that we need minimal notes to the web team to avoid delays. So we are now in March 2024. We have many, many months in front of us. What we are saying here, and Megan indicated that there's a lot of other moving parts and that we're in the process of going through collecting the information and then finally actuating on an additional form set, which will be Forms I. And Forms I are not going to be available to post until the fall, and more specifically, October 2024. So that presents a bit of a dilemma. We can hold everything and everybody can just sort of bunch up at the point of being published, or we can get this information out to the applicants. And so we are basically saying that things that have the SRF review criteria can be posted after the April 24 guide notice that Megan talked about. These will be posted without form packets. So first, we don't have the forms. B, we can't make the packets. And most importantly, we don't want to add potential confusion to applicants. And so we have messaging, a lot of messaging that basically says, if you are submitting for due dates on or before January 24, 2025, you need to use Forms G. If you are submitting for due dates on or after January 2025, you must use Forms I, and those forms will be available on, and we'll give a date. So we're again getting this front and center in front of applicants so that it's hopefully as clear as mud, or as clear as we can make it, which form packets need to be used to submit applications for dates before or after January 2025. So again, things to consider about strategizing which NOFOs that you need to get out the door or want to get out the door earlier versus later. First and most important is, when's the receipt date? Our fellowships are also going to be part of are going to need to be reissued for changes to the fellowship. Their deadline's not till April 2025. So, those guys can wait. But the other things you may need to consider is also companion NOFOs, whether something is new or needs to be reissued, whether you will be having AIDS date in the mix. And so we have an AIDS date on January 7th, 2025, that does not fall under the SRF. And so there is very likelihood that you will have two NOFOs on the street at the same time. One for the January 7th date, which will use Forms G, and one on the street to cover the 30 days for applications that are due after January 25. And so you're going to need to inform us so we can tell the guide, the web team, to not expire the Forms G version of the NOFO. Hopefully that's clear. So we will be able to support two to cover those dates that are during the transition period. So as I mentioned again, and it's important to reiterate, all NOFOs with due dates on or after January 25, 2025 must be posted with Forms I. If we don't have Forms I, they can be published, but they will not have a package because we don't have Forms I yet. And so that just is highlighted in the second bullet, is that these are going to be effectively empty for the forms. And I've already talked about overlapping dates. And then in your planning, please plan about 10 days of a cushion or a buffer. The web team is going to be incredibly busy. And so we do want to build a little bit of buffer to give them an opportunity to do their work without getting, everyone calling them to get them out today. So please anticipate that. That there's a lot of things that are going to be happening at the guide and trying to get things out the door. So do plan an extra 10 days in your process. And then you guys are really, really important because you are the folks that talk to applicants, and they're the ones that are going to be contacting you when they start seeing these notices about what's this all going to look like, what's this going to be, what's this going to mean to me. So the first thing they'll see in some cases is a notice of intent to publish, also known as an NOITP, which says, this is going to be coming in the future. Then they will see notices of extension of expiration dates, and I'll have a picture of that in just a second. They will see the new dates that are added for the extension, and the current NOFOs will be appropriately updated to reflect the new dates. When a NOFO is posted without a package, we will have messaging explaining that there is no package and when they can expect a package, and reminding them if they really are looking for a due date prior to January 25th, 2025, they probably need to look for another NOFO, i.e. the previous version of the NOFO. And that should be indicated as the reissue of. And just to indicate that we basically note if that message is displayed above the table of contents. And so, for example, let me just state that again. So say we have a NOFO that has been reissued for February 5th, 2025. There will not be a package, but on that NOFO above the TOC, there will be an indication when that packet will be posted. Okay, so it's on the reissued notice itself that is packetless. This is what we have created, a special notice to extend. This is what it looks like, and that's really what it's called. And we have provided that information as part of the information associated with this webinar. And this is to facilitate the web team's posting of this basically this table onto the current NOFOs. As I mentioned, if you have NOFOs that all have the same expiration date and you are extending to the same dates, you may include more than one NOFO on this notice to extend. And then this is just a whole bunch of resources that will be made available to you. And they can be found at Resources for Simplifying Framework for Review Feed. The screen is magic here. I must be sending it karma. And so what we will, we will provide, the names of the new templates, the name of the NOFO, the notice, additional guidance for NOFO reissuance, a list of what we capture in a moment's time of the NOFOs that need to be expired. Sorry. Key contacts for questions. So general questions, basically contact the SRF coordinator. Each one of you, in terms of the IC, has one. So those are your first line of opportunity to get information. If you have specific questions, you should reach out to your IC guide liaison. And again, highly recommend looking at all of the information under the Simplifying Review Framework for peer review criteria for research grants. So thank you everyone already who has helped making this transition an event and for contributing to its success. And so I think here we will be answering some questions.
Indeed, we're going to be moving to a panel. Thank you so much for that, Lori. And I do want to emphasize, I see we've got lots of questions going on. We only have about 15 minutes to answer them. We've been answering a lot as we've been going through the Q&A. We're going to be answering as many as we can here. The ones that are about reissuing, and very specifically about reissuing, your guide liaison really is the people who we're talking to all the time about this. We can go ahead and stop sharing the screen. And let me go ahead and start asking questions of our panelists. Okay, so currently, reviewers often consider the track record of the PI in the feasibility of the proposed research. It sounds like feasibility is factor 2. Will comments about investigators' track record be allowed?
Okay, I think it's a review question. I can take that one. So yes, feasibility is still an important part of review. It does fall under factor 2 approach. And it's important for the reviewers to assess if the expertise is there. But it's more about, when we're talking about investigators, more about sufficiency. As far as the resources and expertise, do they have enough to do the research? And that is what we want to focus on.
And so we wouldn't be expecting anybody to expound on their virtues. It's just, it's sufficient or not.
Right. We want to get away from sort of what happened in the past, where it would go on and on about the investigator and their experience, and that would make up for deficiencies in the grant, and that would drive the score instead of looking at what's in the application, looking at all 5 criteria.
Great. Thanks, Brian. How is the effort to simplify the work of review been balanced by the needs to let applicants know how to prepare the applications and keeping in mind what the IC is interested in funding?
I think I can take that question. So as Brian said at the beginning of the talk, that most of the changes with SRF and RPGs are with review and how review is done. So how applicants prepare application is not changing. So what we as program staff or NIH staff, like one of the roles is to help communicate and convey that to applicants. So what you've been doing in the past in talking about overall fit of how a proposal fits within your IC, you should continue to do. But with SRF, just like you have questions about application preparation, the community may be also. So we prepared resources. There's an overview for program officials, their public and staff FAQs, so that you really read through those and be able to convey and communicate that primarily the changes are with review and how it's reviewed rather than how the applications are put together.
Great. Thank you, Paula. Are we allowed to extend funding opportunities that have already been open for the maximum number of council rounds? They think it might be 10. So for example, we might have a NOFO that will now have 12 continuous council rounds. Is that okay?
Yes, Opera has provided guidance that I think was communicated yesterday that yes, you can extend that.
Yep. And so the detailed guidance for extension from the policy office is on the Simplifying Review intranet page and on funding opportunities page. So if you want to read through that, that'd be good. What's the plan for the parent funding opportunities that are managed by OD? Extending to expire, you know, on May 8th, 2024. Will there be an extension to cover cycle 2 for June 5th and July 5th?
Yes, that will be, we're starting that soon, and they basically should be going out next week. That is the intent, to basically bring it to the January 8th deadline to cover the other cycles. And the plan, as I mentioned earlier, is that for SRF, they will be issued with PEDP language.
And Lori, this one I think is also for you. So how many NOFOs can be covered by one notice regarding early expiration?
Again, what we said is anything that has the same expiration date and basically following to the same new dates and same expiration, has the same current expiration date, is moving towards the same future expiration date and is using the same submission dates. It's game.
Great, thank you. Will OER provide examples of IC suggested additions to the simplified review criteria boilerplate language that would be considered acceptable to give ICs some idea of what may or may not be approved? This is kind of the idea, is to avoid delays in the NOFO publication process.
You know, again, they should be evaluative statements. They should be, or they must be. In fact, you know, you have to have asked for them or describe them in other sections of the NOFO. But you guys do a great job on that already. So I don't see that anything, you know, is going to be really different. Hopefully that enters.
And I think we heard from, you know, Dr. Lauer that we're really not looking for additions if we can help it, right? Like, I mean, we're discouraging it a little bit. Can we circle back on, I know there's been back and forth about whether parents will contain PEDP language. I think the last thing we know was
I believe the parent will not include PEDP, and it's not going to be required for any. It's going to be. Is that correct?
My bad.
Yeah, and we're sorry, this has gone kind of back and forth in the thinking, and so yeah, quick correction on that. Okay, are we allowed to extend NOFOs that have already been open for the maximum number of counts? Oh, we already did that, sorry. Will OER allow us to issue a single notice of intent to publish for all SRF NOFOs that we plan to reissue and ones we do not?
The challenge in that is in cross-referencing. So if you don't, so in other words, if we're putting that information in, so whatever, say you put 20 in, into all of those notices is really a challenge. And so I think the expectation would be if you don't care about cross-referencing, I think a couple of the ICs have already done this.
Sorry.
And I did see one earlier. I might just want to reiterate. This might have been said, but I mean, everyone keep in mind there are a number of initiatives going on at NIH. So you probably heard about the NRSA Fellowship. So that is different than Simplified Review Framework. I've heard people say, well, fellowships are part of it. Why aren't they listed in activity code? That's a separate project. There'll be a separate webinar for that. So it's really important to keep that in mind.
Yes, because there's different impacts on applicants, especially. Will CA memos, page waivers, requests, etc., need to be reapproved for unexpired NOFOs that only need to be updated to include the SRF requirements?
What we indicated is if you have approval, we will not require you to have that approval again.
Great. Will the SRF templates currently in foam be changing again before the SRF rollout?
Yes, those are. They had the PEDP templates that will be available and should be used has the interim PEDP language. So that is the only thing that will be changing between those two versions.
Great. Will updates to Forms I be made on the back end upon the release for applicable NOFOs? So the answer, I know the answer to that because my team does that, right? I'm waiting for you guys to answer the question. Yeah, so if a NOFO is published and it's published without the application forms, right in the section where you would normally find the forms in the NOFO, it's going to say when to kind of expect them. And then my team, when the forms are available, will start adding them to the funding opportunities.
And just to follow up, Megan, things that are not SRF, RPGs that are not part of the process and all of the other activity codes will also be updated so that everything going forward for January 25, 2025 will all be Forms I.
Yep. Will the SRF apply to SEPs for RFAs with or without set-asides released after January 25th, 2025, with activity codes that fall under this framework?
I'll take that one just so I can answer a question. The answer is yes. If it's a impacted activity code and the applications are coming in after January 25th, 2025, then yeah.
And someone's saying this may be premature to ask, but 3 years from now, all of the same NOFOs will be expiring at once. That's a good point. Is there a plan to extend staggered NOFO expiration dates to spread out the workload?
So I can say how we're handling that from an IC perspective. When we're doing our reissuing, we are not reissuing all of our NOFOs for 3 years. Many of them we are reissuing in what we're terming time remaining. So some might be 1 more year, some might be 2 more years. And then there are some that are for 3 years in an effort to stagger the workload, because that's a very real concern. If you do all of them for 3 years, you're going to be back in the same place 3 years from now.
That's really great advice. I want to thank everybody for participating. Thank you for answering questions. Thank you for being an engaged audience. I do want to let you know that we will be looking through all these questions, and we'll be looking at the ones that are coming up frequently and adding them to the frequently asked questions. We will be making this recording available and the presentation materials available to you. And so you can expect that at the end of next week. If you have concerns, want to know more on particular topics, find that there are resources that you would like to have, please communicate with your ICO coordinator. That's what they're there for, to answer questions, to hear from you, and make sure the implementation team is aware. I see that we're getting lots of applause and hearts, and I appreciate that. Thank you. We've had lots of people preparing hard for this. All right. Thank you so much. And that concludes this webinar.